subscribe to Vulture channel where you can access the latest US news.
We have some questions starting with Evan O'Neill, who's here. He's from New York City, works for the New York Solar Energy Industries Association. Evan, go ahead.
I live at sea level in New York City. You said in a presidential debate that we need to retreat from vulnerable neighborhoods such as mine. Is this a viable option for New York? It's one of America's great cultural and economic assets. How do you propose to help places at risk due to climate change? Will funds be available for adaptation and relocation? How will those funds be generated and distributed?
Thanks for the question. I was just in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where they have hundreds of homes that are flooding on a regular basis, 26 times or more per year. So imagine living in a home that's prone to flooding at that level of frequency, which is even more extreme than I suspect your home here in New York. So we would 100% make funds available to communities around the country for adaptation and resilience. And then we would take, and the big picture is we subsidize the fossil fuel industry to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. And so now everyone's looking around being like, where's the money? Where's the money? It's like, well, we know where the money is. We put hundreds of billions into the fossil fuel industry. We're still subsidizing it to this day. And now it's time to take some of that money and channel it to the needs of the American people. We're looking around, there are already climate refugees in the United States of America, people that we relocated from an island that was essentially becoming uninhabitable in Louisiana. We moved those people. None of this is speculative anymore. We need to get with the program, wake up to the reality around us, and let you know that you're not on your own. This is not a you problem, this is an us problem. And what do sophisticated advanced societies do when there's an us problem? We put some of our collective resources to work and we solve the problems on the ground.
Would you eliminate some subsidies for fossil fuel or all subsidies?
I'd get rid of them all. I mean, why would you leave any of them on? And I have to say, well, it's even darker than this, because you know how they've been spending some of their money, their billions of dollars in profit, on a misinformation campaign to the American people. And they've taken our legislature hostage. They have the fossil fuel lobbying industry that's in the tens of millions a year. And so we have to take back our government for the American people. I've been running for president now for a number of months, and this is the brutal truth in our society. There's the people on one side and the money on another. And you know a lot of the money is fossil fuel companies. So what do we have to do? We have to bring these together. We have to align the people and the money. Now, how the heck do you do that? My plan is to give every American citizen 100 democracy dollars that you can give to any campaign or candidate that you like in any given year. This would wash out the lobbyist cash by a factor of 8 to 1. It would make it so that if I'm a candidate and you like me, and then I get 10,000 Americans to like me, let's say in a congressional race, that's $1 million. And then when the fossil fuel company comes and says, I've got a check for you for $50,000, you can say, I don't need your $50,000 check. I have the people. That's how we take the government back from fossil fuel companies and start getting our government working for us again.
All right, I want to stay on this subject. We have a question from Vic Barrett from White Plains, New York. He's a fellow with the Alliance for Climate Education, has spoken at the UN Conference on Climate Change. He's among 21 youth activists between the ages of 10 and 21 who are suing the government for its contribution to climate change in the case of Juliana versus the United States. Vic, go ahead.
Oh, innovative.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Do you agree that the President of the United States has the constitutional obligation to end federal government support and promotion of a fossil fuel energy system, considering it endangers all citizens, especially young people like myself and future generations?
As I just stated, I would end all fossil fuel subsidies, and I'm going to take it a step further. I proposed a constitutional amendment that makes it the responsibility of the United States government to safeguard and protect our environment for future generations. It's part of my $5.5 trillion plan to help address climate change. We need a constitutional amendment. We need to move our economy towards sustainable sources of energy. Here's another brutal truth. The United States of America is only 15% of global emissions. So if we really want to get the best of climate change, we have to make it so that countries in Africa and the developing world choose wind and solar over coal. And right now, the Chinese are going to African countries and saying, I've got a power plant for you. Great news, it burns coal. And what does that African country say in response? Great, because they're just looking for cheap energy. So if we're going to get the best of climate change, we have to go into these countries and make renewable sources of energy more competitive, So that's number 2 or 3 if you include the constitutional amendment. Number 4, we need to get our people to higher ground. You're not on your own. We need to start making our communities more resilient and protect ourselves. And you all know, if you've heard anything about me in the campaign, what's my flagship proposal? Freedom dividend. Everyone gets $1,000 a month. $12,000 a year. That would help citizens of this country protect themselves in a natural disaster, because we all know when Hurricane Dorian or Hurricane Harvey hits, who suffers? Poor people, people of color, people who don't have a car they can get into and just drive to some relative's house. So we need to actually start protecting ourselves. And the last thing is we need to start trying to reverse the damage we're doing to our environment. It's not enough to do less of the bad. We have to do some of the good. So that's reforestation, that's ocean seeding, that's starting to actually rebuild the ecosystems that we're harming.
I got 3 quick questions. You give me yes or no if you want. Would you ban all fossil fuel exports from the United States?
Well, I think we have to stop subsidizing the industry, but I don't think that includes banning exports, because if our industry, fossil fuel industry, which is going to be around for some period of time, is competitive and cost competitive enough to export to another country, I wouldn't stand in the way of that.
Are you in favor of a carbon-free America? And if yes, when?
I'm in favor of a carbon-free America, and my plan has us getting there in the next 30 years.
Do you support a carbon tax, and how much should it be?
I do support a carbon tax. If you went to my website, Wolf, you would know this. Yang2020.com. We need to have a carbon tax because we need to have polluters internalize the cost of their pollution. And so you start at $40 a ton and then you ramp up to $100 a ton to give them time to adjust. But these companies only operate on the bottom line. You can't say do the right thing and then have all the executives get paid for making tons of money at the expense of the earth. So what you have to do, again, you have to tie these things together. And this is a big theme of my campaign. This country runs on the almighty dollar, truthfully. It does not run on doing the right thing by us or the planet. So what we have to do is we have to tie people's incentives to doing the right thing, and then you'll actually see their behavior change very quickly.
I want to bring in CNN's chief climate correspondent, Bill Weir.
Mr. Yang, a moment ago you mentioned that sinking town in Louisiana, and I'm so glad you did, because we have a map. It is called Ile de Jean Charles. That is the Gulf of Mexico, and this is 1985. Watching a single generation, how much seawater has taken over this part of America.
Oh my gosh.
And this is what it looks like. It is in a lifetime slipping into the sea, and it's so doomed that the federal government is spending, as you said, $48 million to move about 24 families 40 miles north. But I spent time there, and half of them do not want to leave the only home they've ever known. Some don't trust the government. They think this is a land grab. So if it's this expensive and costly to move less than 100 people, how do you envision a managed retreat for maybe millions from places like Miami, Charleston, elsewhere?
This is one of the great challenges of our time, and most Americans like where they live. Most Americans do not have a strong inclination to leave, even in the wake of a natural disaster. So first, we need to try and invest in making some of these communities more resilient, which will not work in some cases, as in this town, but it will work in others. New York is an example where if we were to invest significant resources, we might be able to save, essentially it's one of those situations where you invest $1 billion and then save perhaps 5 or 10 billion in damages if you do it right. So there are some instances where you pre-invest before the disaster hits. The second thing is that when there are communities that need to be rebuilt, we need to do a better job of, frankly, building institutional trust in our society and the government again. Because right now, many Americans mistrust our government. We're living in a country where 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost half can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. So when you come to them and say, hey, we have your interests at heart, they have their heads down and there's not much optimism or faith. So the freedom dividend of $1,000 a month, it has many effects, but one thing it does, it gets people's heads up. And studies have shown that getting the boot off of people's throats economically, one, it gets them focused on the big problems like climate change, because it's very hard to focus 10 years in the future if you're worried about next month's rent. But the second thing it does, it restores public faith and optimism and trust in our institutions, and then we'll be able to galvanize more energy around relocation over time.
Thank you for listening. See you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe our channel. Bye bye.
Climate change should be, they tell me it's going to be about 8 questions. The town hall audience is going to be
climate change activists, so I'm sure they'll be very sophisticated, very engaged, very passionate. And yeah, it's a great opportunity. Not only that, but I have to say, CNN is pretty convenient to the office, so I'll say that I